All right, good evening and welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live broadcast on your favorite football updates channel. On this first or inaugural UEFA Champions League night of the 2025-2026 Champions League season. Games have already been played and completed while other games are ongoing. That's why our headline says it's a UEFA Champions League watch along as because as we speak, um, Juventus and Borussia Dortmund are sharing the spoils in a 2-all draw, while Quarterback have come from 2 goals down to restore parity against Benfica. Real Madrid is still 1-all against Olympic Marseille, while Tottenham Hotspur retained that 1-0. Thanks to Luis Junior's own goal that is keeping Tottenham Hotspur in the front. Earlier on, Arsenal beat up against Athletic Bilbao by 2 goals to 0, while Union Saint Gilloise Saint Gilloise managed to beat up against PSV Eindhoven by 3 goals to 1, a result that I did not see coming. My prediction had been a 2-1 victory for Arsenal, but they did much better than that. They managed to keep a clean sheet, but they had to grind out the result in itself. The game in itself wasn't as pretty as one would have hoped. But anyways, a win is a win, and that's all that will count at the end of the day. Bit of a 50-50 sort of performance from Victor Gyökeres. Declan Rice needed to, restore his reputation in the second half, having struggled through the first half and things like that. So we'll be discussing that as we go on as a part of this broadcast. But for now, let's follow the events as they happen between Real Madrid and Olympic Marseille, with that game being at 1-all in the 70th minute. But also, must I mention, it was Dusan Blajovic, by the way, who found the equalizer for Juventus to make sure that they restore parity against Borussia Dortmund. Apologies on that. But anyways, so yeah, that one is also happening. So I mean, it's not been a disappointing night so far. What a strike! Is that 3-2? Borussia Dortmund have just scored to make it 3-2. I mean, it's not the kind of scoreline that I would expect, especially an Italian team, to be at the receiving end of 3 goals for a team of Juventus' caliber. But and yet here we are talking about it being 3-2 in favor of Borussia Dortmund against Juventus. So I mean, beautiful goal squad in there to make it 3-2 in favor of Borussia Dortmund. Excuse me. Hi, LFC. How are you doing, my brother? How has been your day? Are you enjoying the UEFA Champions League night? What games are you catching up on? Or it's a busy night of research and homework for you, depending, of course. We know that Igor Tudor cannot believe that they've just conceded for the third time on the night. I mean, I don't know. Forgive me if I'm more accustomed or more used to that Juventus side of you're doing homework. Okay. It is what it is. School is school. But I don't know. I think my mind is in part, sort of stuck with that Juventus side that was under the charges of Antonio Conte, who are really, really hard to score against, and subsequently Massimiliano Allegri, that kind of side that had Antonio Bazzagli, Bonucci, and Giorgio Chiellini, in that sort of defense, there's a potential red card incident that is being reviewed in that game between Real Madrid and Olympic Marseille. Dan Carvajal does appear to headbutt the goalkeeper, I think, of Olympic Marseille, and the referee was sent to the monitor, and he's gone for the color red. So off he goes. That is, Danny Carvajal. Guys, forgive me, but I do get so pissed with some of these players when they get to do these kinds of things. Reason being, you're Danny Carvajal, you're the captain of the team, you're more experienced than everybody on that pitch, you know, and you go ahead and do something that stupid that you very well know could get you such a booking. Whether you believe it is being fair or not fair in the moment when it is being issued, that is all beside the point. You should know better. You ought to know better as a player of his experience, you know, as a player of his experience. You ought to know better. You ought to do better. You ought to judge yourself better. You ought to behave better. You're the example on that turf, you know. You must be exemplary, not just in your leadership, but in the way you also behave, because we know that leadership goes hand in hand with all that. So I think is the red card fair? I mean, he did not need to do what he did. That's as simple as I'll put it. He did not need to do what he did, and yet he chose to do it anyway. You know, he chose to do it anyway. Yes, you're having a bit of a spat with an opponent. You sort of having exchanging words, and I know some words can be irritating, and sometimes, you know, it is easy for us to sit here and make judgment or pass judgment on these players on how they react in certain moments. But my point is, it's not the first time this is happening to him. You know, it's not the first time that he's having a verbal exchange with an opponent. When you're playing in the UEFA Champions League, regardless of at what stage, the stakes are already high. You know, the stakes are already high. And bearing in mind that we know for a fact that Real Madrid, I think, needed last season needed a playoff to advance to the knockout stages. That playoff in which I think they first with what? Who was it? I'm forgetting. But we know they needed a playoff, you know. And this time around, they're seeking to do better. How do they get to do better with Xabi Alonso when senior players like Danny Carvajal are behaving in the way they are behaving? That's unavoidable. That's a red card that he could have been able to avoid. And does this have anything to say about Real Madrid's overall discipline? Because we remember Dean Haasen being sent off in one of those games, I think during the FIFA Club World Cup. We remember Raul Raul Asensio being one of those being sent off during that tournament as well, being given a red card. And so it's, I don't want to think it's become a norm, but it's become more common than desired for a Real Madrid player to be receiving a red card, you know. And in this particular case, I'll simply blame it on, you know, on the player. In Dan Carvajal, you got to do better. You all got to do better than that. You ought to give yourself a chance. Do not give the referee a decision to make. Do not give him that chance. And as soon as he went to that monitor, there was only one decision that he was going to make, that he was going to issue a red card, because while the impact of the headbutting does not appear to be that strong, the mere fact that he even attempts it is ugly in itself, you know, is ugly in itself. So they will be very, very disappointed with his behavior. I know Real Madrid fans will think to themselves, maybe the referee was a bit too harsh in passing judgments and things like that. That's okay for you to think that way. But let's not forget, Dan Carvajal is not a 19-year-old. He's not a 22-year-old. He's not a 17-year Franco Mastantuano playing at this stage for the first time. That's not the kind of player we are talking about, you know. We are talking about a player who is really, really, really well proven at the highest of ranks, at the highest of levels, you know, in as far as football is concerned. I mean, he's won this competition. He's been there. He knows what it means. He knows what it means, you know. He knows what it means. So I just don't get why you go ahead and do that kind of thing, you know. So really, he ought to have done better. He ought to have done better, in my opinion. He ought to have done better. He did not do himself any wonders in the manner in which he did sort of behave. Um, you're costing your team. It's already 1-1. They're fighting their way to get that decent result, you know, to get that decent result, to get the victory. And there you are, I don't know, trying to what? Prove a point in a an unnecessary argument with an opponent, you know. I mean, unnecessary is what I call it. Yes. Remember last season, Real Madrid finished what was it, about 14th or thereabouts? No, in fact, let me see, 9, 10, 11. They finished 11th on that UEFA Champions League tally or log. That's how, you know, bad it was, because they garnered about 15 points, and that put them in those positions that they ended up having to play playoffs, you know. Now, when they played playoffs, of course, they advanced. They went through, including knocking out, I think, Manchester City along the way, and then eventually meeting, you know, Arsenal in the quarterfinals, which they lost. So, at the, you know, at the knockout phase, they first off with Manchester City and managed to go through a 6-3 or on aggregate score, you know. Then came to the round of 16. The round of 16, they first off with their city rivals in Atletico de Madrid, who they managed to knock out, you know, and then they met Arsenal in the quarterfinals and got beat home and away. But all that notwithstanding, my point is Danny Carvajal did not do himself any favors against. I mean, it wasn't so far back that they had made those substitutions of Vinicius Jr. and Brahim Diaz to try and do what? To try and, you know, get the advantage. Meanwhile, Real Madrid have won themselves a penalty in this game, or at least it appears to be. There's a call we are waiting on, and we're into the 81st minute of the game. For those of you that are following the conversation, in case what you're watching is slightly ahead of mine, blame that on the low bandwidth, because my ISP, even after upgrading to 100 Mbps, still internet speeds are not what you'd hope they would be, really. Oh, it's a handball. Now, again, this is one of those dubious penalties. It's not a clear and obvious error in the first place. That's why, because the player goes in for a tackle, makes contact with the ball, and then the ball hits his arm while it's on the floor. You know, how do you penalize that? Unless the angle, the only angle from which I've seen it isn't resolute enough to pass judgment. But if that is the same angle that the referee has used to pass this kind of judgment, then I mean, so difficult. Olympic Marseille should feel hard done by. I mean, this is the second penalty they are conceding on the night. And meanwhile, Borussia Dortmund have scored the fourth against Juventus, and it's 4-2. Igor Tudor will be very, very lucky to still be the Juventus manager by Christmas. He will be very, very lucky, because it's one thing to scrap out a result against Inter Milan by 4-3, the Italian Serie A, but losing to Borussia Dortmund by 4-2 at the moment, as is not a good sign. Remember, Juventus are at home, and that's a scary thing. They are at home, you know. Oh, come on. Meanwhile, Kylian Mbappe stepped up and scored the resultant penalty. The goalkeeper nearly saved it, but he just fell short. He managed to get a hand to it, but it just wasn't strong enough to push it in a different direction. And it's 2-1 in favor of Real Madrid, both penalties. But for me, if common sense was to suffice, I do not see a way how Real Madrid get awarded that penalty. I just do not see it. I just don't understand it. You know, I just don't get it. Because the incident is slightly similar for what Borussia Dortmund and themselves the penalty against Juventus. The incident is a little bit similar. Player tries to go to the floor to make a block, ends up in in the wrong direction. Ball hits his arm while he's on the floor. I mean, why are you supposed to put these arms in those kinds of situations? Because we can all argue that arms were not in a natural position, but it's not like he had been told to sleep straight in a coffin. You know, there's this assumption that the actions of the arms are always voluntary, and yet they're not anything further from reflex actions. You know, they're not anything further from that. They are exactly that. They are exactly that. Olympic must have probing to try and find, that equalizer, but it's not come as of yet. So really, but that's football for you. That's football. But for me, I feel that penalty, I wouldn't be issuing it. I'd use my common sense would say, what would you have done to prevent the ball hitting your arm? In both instances, by the way, not just the Real Madrid instance, even that one of Borussia Dortmund. Unless by default, I'll have seen different angles to the penalties that have been awarded to change my perception or my verdict on them. But for now, based on what I've seen, there's this sort of cloud assumption that human beings are like dogs, that when they are going into certain actions, they should be plucking off their arms and parking them to the side and then play without them and then pick up the slack once the situation has been alleviated. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Oh, Brahim Diaz with a beautiful attempt for the goalkeeper comes to the rescue, makes a brilliant save for Olympic Marseille. It remains 2-1 in favor of Real Madrid. Both have been penalties scored by Kylian Mbappe, while Timothy Weah, the son to George Opong Weah, the former Liberian president and only player to have won the Ballon d'Or, the only African player to have won the Ballon d'Or, did score to give Olympic Marseille the lead. Wow. Brilliant save from Thibaut Courtois. Brilliant save from Thibaut Courtois. I think it was Mason Greenwood with the attempt. Apologies, guys. This over-yawning that you see, that's it had me. It's just been one of those days. Been a long day. It's been a long day, really. And yet we must follow up on these updates. Like I was saying earlier on, for that game against Arsenal, I thought it was a very, very dull game. The first half did not have much to offer. Really, you felt that both teams were all over the place. They did not do I don't know, they afforded each other a lot of respect. They lacked sharpness in the final third. While they both managed to go forward, there's nothing coming good of that. The ball kept being bounced around midfield. Arsenal sort of having majority of the possession and things like that. And yet, it just felt dull, even in the second half. Now, in the second half, the game came to light a bit. Arsenal, of course, were once again over-reliant on their right wing through Noni Madueke, but they could not get the ball forward much quicker to Ebeleche Eze, to Noni Madueke. That ball was literally taking a snail's pace to get to those wingers. And that's why they hardly had any impact. I mean, I felt sorry for Ebeleche Eze, who was played at the left wing. And there I was thinking to myself, oftentimes, as he waited for that ball, he went to Noni Madueke's side. And I was thinking to myself, doesn't the manager see this? I mean, I know it's by design, but can't he call upon his team to sort of adjust? Because sometimes they are over-reliant on that right wing and it doesn't pay off. And yet you feel that if they had sort of had a fair distribution between the right and left wing, it would have given them a chance. And yet they don't do it that way. So, and majority of the balls were going in Noni Madueke's direction. While he looked good, he was very, very inefficient in some of the things that he did, especially when it came to the cutbacks, the crosses. I think he had about 2 attempts on goal, which did not have enough power to trouble the goalkeeper, to trouble Unai Simon, and things like that. In the second half, Arsenal stepped a bit up. I think players like Declan Rice, he did step up in the second half. I feared for him going into the second half because he was on the risk of getting himself a second booking and subsequently a red card, which wouldn't have worked in Arsenal's favor, but he managed to stay clear of that. I thought he was very, very hardworking. Martin Zubimendi in that midfield did not tire himself. He really, really did well. Although my man of the match for that game particularly was that in Gabriel Magalhaes. I thought he was really, really rock solid in that centre back, role. And now I understand, some people may want to point it in the direction of Christian Mosquera. He had a very, very beautiful game. But Gabriel Magalhaes, his calmness, his composure, his leadership in that back line, that, had Ricardo Carafiori playing as an inverted left winger. It had Yuan Timber. There's a moment that in the first half where Athletic Bilbao almost nearly scored, Juventus have scored to make it 4-3. They've managed to pull another one back, I think, through Dusan Vlahovic, So, I mean, you look at it and think to yourself, it's just not right, So, because I was speaking about that moment where Arsenal nearly conceded in the first half, Yuan Timber had a bad tackle on the other side that ended with him having his boot off his foot, and then I think he sort of hurt himself in a way, not too badly to force him off, but enough to slow him down, and then Bilbao restart the game and go on a bit of a quick counter, and they find themselves on the other side in the final third, and they did cross that ball. Wow, what a game. It's 4-4. Juventus have found the equalizer. Here I was thinking, at 4-2, the game is as good as one for Borussia Dortmund. Now, Niko Kovac, what are you going to tell the rest of the world? You had the ball by its horns. You're playing away from home. Show some bit of solidity. Dusan Vlahovic with a beautiful cross. Is this guy onside? I think it will be checked, but for now it's 4-4. Dusan Vlahovic providing the assist. Beautiful cross he puts in, and it's headed home into the back of the net. So Um, Again, the first half was that kind of game that for which you could doze off with. Although the second half proved to be different, Arsenal needed were reliant on their second half substitutes in Gabriel Martinelli and Leandro Trossard, who both scored with each providing the assist for the other to make sure that to make sure that Arsenal walked away with all 3 points on the open day of the UEFA Champions League. So I thought, Gabriel Martinelli was barely 60 seconds onto that turf when he goes on to score to make it 1-0, and then the calmness and composure with which Leandro Trossard takes in that ball, and he sort of fires it into the back of the net. I know it does take a deflection to beat Unai Simon in the Atletico Bilbao, goal, but yeah, it was really really good. It was good to watch. It was a decent goal. It was a fine finish because he knew what he was doing in placing that ball, and maybe the slight deflection that he takes before he beats the goalkeeper to the near post is what really he needed to find the back of the net. But take nothing away from Leandro Trossard. Very, very good game. Very good cameo. He did have, excuse me. Some people, or a lot of people, did criticize the withdrawal of Dusan Vlahovic. They thought he should have stayed on. Mikel Merino being pushed further up front. I don't know. Every time Mikel Merino plays in midfield, I sort of have these feelings that I intend to have about Kai Havertz. What are you actually good at? When they play in midfield, I know they are workaholics. I know they put in their all, but once in a while, they're going to have a game that causes you to wonder whether they are worth what they are getting, whether what's their best position. The game between Juventus and Borussia Dortmund has finished 4-4. Karim Adeyemi was on the score sheet, as well as Koto, Numenka, and then Ben Sebaini, the other goal scorer. Then Dusan Vlahovic with the brace for Juventus. Kenan Yildiz had scored in the 64th minute to restore parity, while Lewis Kelly did score the equalizer, with Dusan Vlahovic having a man of the match kind of performance, scoring 2 and providing 1 to make sure. Meanwhile, this is what happened. Juventus squad got to score the third goal. We go into added time, and the game is still 4-2. And then in the 94th minute, or the 4th minute of added time, Dusan Vlahovic scores to make it 4-3. And then 2 minutes later, Lewis Kelly is scoring to make it 4-4. That's how crazy football can be. That's how results can quickly change. I do not know if anybody had placed a bet of that kind, but usually when you 2 goes down and we are into at the time of the 90 minutes, your chances of really survival are very, very minimal. And yet here you are showing up with those sort of results or evidence. Anyways, another beautiful game of football, But the game between Real Madrid is also soon closing down, with Real Madrid leading by 2-0. Tottenham Hotspurs have managed to beat up against Villarreal by 1-0. Lewis Jr.? Yes, Lewis Jr. that scored an own goal, which turned out to be the match winner. Meanwhile, away from the UEFA Champions League, Grimsby Town, Football Royale. Hi, bro. How are you doing, my brother? How has been your day? In the EFL Cup, Martinelli looks good as a striker. By the way, come to think about it, You remember last season in the 2-all draw between Arsenal and Liverpool at Anfield, when I think I do not remember who was withdrawn before he got put into that center forward kind of role, and he did really well. He did really well, and people were thinking maybe we ought to try Gabriel Martinelli as a center forward, not just Mikel Merino. And today he came on and seconds into his cameo, and he goes on to score. What was a beautiful goal. For some, it looked like a near miss, while for others, it was a typical kind of goal that a striker gets to score, putting that ball under the armpits of the goalkeeper, uh, leaving him with a space too narrow for him to twist into and save that ball. I thought he took that ball in his stride really well. But like I was saying, in the EFL Cup, Grimsby Town have knocked out, apologies, Jesus Christ. Okay. Yes, Grimsby Town have knocked out Sheffield United, beating them by a goal to nil, while Brentford and Aston Villa shared the spoils in a 1-all draw. That game is on in penalties. Crystal Palace, same fate happened to them against Millwall. They couldn't win in normal time, so they are destined for penalties. That's for the EFL Cup. Remember, Grimsby Town is the side that knocked out Manchester United. But yeah, as far as the UEFA Champions League is concerned, all games are done. Like I said, Tottenham have beaten up against Villarreal by goal to nil. Real Madrid needed 2 penalties to beat up against Olympique Marseille by 2-1, while Borussia Dortmund and Juventus shared the spoils in a 4-all draw, while Qarabag came from 2 goals down to beat up against Benfica by 3-2. Again, another surprise result on the night, because it was it was Benfica who got into the early lead, including Pavlidis, one of the goal scorers there, scoring in the 16th minute, while their opener had come in the 6th minute, so 10 minutes apart between the 2 goals. And yet somehow, Qarabag had managed to only pick up a consolation at the half-hour mark through Andrade, and then Duran, as well as Kashchuk squad to make sure that Qarabag walk away with 3 points. I mean, Bruno Lage must be really pissed with his side, given that they squandered a 2-0 lead to lose to a team like Qarabag. Really, when we talk about Champions League pedigree, Qarabag and do not even qualify to polish or to clean Benfica's shoes in that regard, and yet they managed to beat them. So like I said, Union sent Giloise managed to beat up against PSV and Hoven by 3-1, while Arsenal beat up against Athletic Bilbao by 2-0. Like I said, Leandro Trossard and Gabriel Martinelli, both second-half substitutes, are coming to the rescue of that Arsenal side. Gabriel Martinelli should be food for thought for Mikel Arteta as a center forward, not as a starter, but as an immediate backup to Victor Gyökeres, as opposed to it being Mikel Merino in the interim, with the absence of Kai Havertz through injury, as well as his additions in when it comes to that. And then, of course, ahead of Gabriel Jesus, who we know is not expected to be back to action until possibly December or January, according to Arsenal's medical doctors. Guys, I know I would have loved us to go on and discuss these results and discuss what they meant, and perhaps even get a glimpse into what's to come tomorrow, including Liverpool being up against Atletico de Madrid, while Chelsea take on Bayern Munich. But allow me go rest. Allow me call it quits, because it's been that bit of a long day, really. It's been that bit of a long day. Anyways, Thank you so much, LFC. Thank you so much, Football Royal, and every single one of you that managed to, catch catch the broadcast. I do not take your love and support for granted. I wish you the very best of a wonderful night. Let's engage tomorrow morning in as far as those results are concerned. Stay blessed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye for now.